Good afternoon. We're going to begin our conference committee for House File 1938 now. I think you have an agenda with you. We don't have particularly a presentation on the renter's credit. I just want to keep saying how important I think this new policy is. I think it's one of the most creative things we've been able to do in the last 10 years or so. I particularly appreciate the work that former Representative Marquardt did on it, and I certainly think we'll work hard, and I will keep saying this, work hard to make sure that we find the correct revenue to support that going forward, because we probably won't have that opportunity again in a number of years. So from there, we had sent the House, and we're going to present them now, some of the same and similars that we identified that we thought could be a good starting point for adopting provisions and sections in the bill, and certainly there are going to be others as well going forward. But the document is dated 5/6/2023, 8:16 a.m. That's the wrong one. Okay. These things change. Okay. It's now May 8th. 5/8/2023, 8:30 a.m. And we're going to go through what those changes or what those sames and similars are. And then I will call on Senator Klein to make the proper motion if they're agreeable to be brought up to you, Representative Gomez. Yes?
Sounds good, Madam Chair.
Okay, good. So Scruffa, if you have the description of those possibilities on the piece of paper, the asterisk marks the what is our position on each one of them. Goes back and forth between who has the better language, as recommended by Scruffa and House Research. And the side-by-side summary is where you will find the provisions and the comparison. So, Mr. Sylvia, do you want to begin?
Madam Chair, members, the first item on this same and similar list includes tax increment financing OSA changes. Earlier this session, the Office of the State Auditor had a proposal that included several sort of policy and technical changes to administer tax increment financing law. The Senate and the House proposal was nearly identical. There was only one section, and that's noted on page 62 of the side-by-side, concerning the definition of administrative expenses. Within that section of law, there's also a list of expenses that are not considered administrative expenses. And the Senate proposes that the purchase of land or buildings is not to be considered an administrative expense, and the House provides that the purchase of land and buildings are not considered administrative expenses. That one word is the only difference in the entire article, and otherwise it is identical, and I believe the offer, Madam Chair, that you were prepared to make would be to adopt the Senate article, and if so, it would be Article 8 in its entirety.
Senator Klein?
Madam Chair, I move that the Conference Committee adopt the Office of the State Auditor's Tax Increment Finance changes in Senate Article 8, all sections for inclusion in the Tax Omnibus Conference Committee report.
Any discussion of that motion or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. The motion prevails, and those sections, that motion will be included in the Omnibus Conference Committee report. Next, from the Public Finance article.
Madam Chair, members, the next provision, as you indicated, is the public finance article that can be found on pages 77 to 79 on the side-by-side. The provisions were identical in the House and Senate with the exception of the Senate did not include House Article 10, Section 1. This is related to time deposits, allowing local public funds to be invested in time deposits that are fully insured by the National Association of Credit Unions. The Senate did not include that section, but I understand, Madam Chair, the offer to be including House Article 10, Sections 1 through 14, which would be the House Public Finance article in its entirety.
Senator Klein?
Madam Chair, I move that the Conference Committee adopt the Public Finance article in House, Article 10, Sections 1 through 14 for inclusion in the Tax Omnibus Conference Committee report.
Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. The motion prevails, and that will be included in the Conference Committee report. The next item?
Madam Chair,
Mr.
members,
Sylvia.
the next item would be the St. Paul bond authorization. This language is identical in both bills with just technical, inconsequential differences in the effective date. This section would extend by 10 years the authority for St. Paul to issue bonds for capital improvements, and would also increase the aggregate principal amount from 20 million to 30 million. And Madam Chair, the proposed offer would be to adopt House Article 12, Section 29.
Senator Klein?
Madam Chair, I move that the Conference Committee adopt the City of St. Paul bond authorization provision in House, Article 12, Section 29 for inclusion in the Tax Omnibus Conference Committee report.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. The motion prevails. The police and fire state aids? Mr. Arneson?
Madam Chair, the next item for consideration is the Department of Revenue's policy and technical provisions for fire and police state aids. That is in House Article 14 and Senate Article 15. The articles are identical, and I believe the motion would be to adopt House Article 14, all sections.
Senator Klein?
Madam Chair, I move that the Conference Committee adopt the Department of Revenue's policy and technical provisions for fire and police state aids in House Article 14, all sections, for inclusion in the Tax Omnibus Conference Committee report.
Discussion, seeing none. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. The motion prevails.
Madam Chair, the next item for consideration is the Department of Revenue's policy and technical provisions for data practices in House Article 15 and Senate Article 16. The articles are identical, and the motion would be to adopt House Article 15, all sections.
Senator Klein?
I move that the Conference Committee adopt the Department of Revenue's policy and technical provisions for data practices in House Article 15, all sections, for inclusion in the Tax Omnibus Conference Committee report. Madam
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. The motion prevails. Next.
Madam Chair, the next item for consideration is a selection of sections from the Department of Revenue's policy and technical miscellaneous provisions. That's House Article 16 and Senate Article 17. I understand that House Section 1, which is very similar to the provision carried in Senate Article 13, Section 4, does not have universal agreement. And so the motion would be to adopt House Article 16, Sections 2 through 5.
Discussion? Anyone or a comment? Seeing none, Senator Klein?
Madam Chair, I move that the Conference Committee adopt the Department of Revenue's policy and technical miscellaneous provisions in House Article 16, Sections 2 through 5 for inclusion in the Tax Omnibus Conference Committee report.
Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. The motion prevails. Next.
Madam Chair, members, the next item relates to a petition challenging the validity of an assessment in district or tax court. This makes some changes related to the number of copies that must be filed and where that copy of a petition may be filed with what particular office. The provisions are identical in both the House and the Senate bill, other than reference to a county website rather than the use of its website in the House proposal. And also, the Senate proposal makes this provision effective immediately upon final enactment, whereas the House provides an August 1st, 2023 effective date. I understand, Madam Chair, the proposal to be adopting Senate Article 13, Section 6.
Before we have the motion, Representative Gomez, is there any difficulty with taking the Senate effective date immediately? Okay, thank you. Senator Klein.
Madam Chair, I move that the Conference Committee adopt a provision relating to the determination of validity for assessments in Senate, Article 13, Section 6, for inclusion in the Tax Omnibus Conference Committee report.
Any discussion or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Motion prevails.
Madam Chair, members, the next provision is the Department of Revenue Income and Corporate Franchise Policy and Technical Provisions. The articles here differ in that the Senate included some of the department's original language pertaining to the policy and technical issues on the PTE tax. The Senate also carried those provisions in Article 1, and the House carried those provisions, kind of moved them from the department article into Article 1. So there are several sections that are the same in House Article 13 and Senate Article 14. And so the provisions that are the same in each bill would be Senate Article 14, Sections 4, 6, and 9 to 11.
Any discussion or questions? Senator Klein.
Madam Chair, I move that the Conference Committee adopt the Department of Revenue's policy and technical provisions for income and corporate franchise taxes in Senate, Article 14, Sections 4, 6, and 9 through 11, for inclusion in the Tax Omnibus Conference Committee report.
Discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. The motion prevails.
Madam Chair, members, the last item for discussion relates to the county interest rate. This language is identical in both the House and the Senate bill and would remove a 10% minimum payment or interest rate payment charge on delinquent property taxes and would allow the county board by resolution to set a lower interest rate. As I indicated, the language is identical in both the House and the Senate proposal, and the proposed offer would be to adopt House Article 12, Sections 7 and 8.
Senator Klein.
Madam Chair, I move that the Conference Committee adopt the county interest rate changes in House, Article 12, Sections 7 and 8, for inclusion in the Tax Omnibus Conference Committee report.
Discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. The motion prevails. And the items that we have reviewed on this document will be included as voted on by motion in the conference committee report. We're looking at here this afternoon some provisions that don't have costs that are in the, I guess I'm sorry, I'm not speaking long enough. On 4D, and I'm going to call on Mr. Sylvia to explain the Senate approach to 4D. And Mr. Bergman, did we hand out the transition aid?
Yes, ma'am, that handout looks like this. Everyone at the table should have it, and there should be copies for the public.
Okay, Mr. Sylvia.
Madam Chair, members, there are several sections in the Senate bill that relates to Class 4D low-income rental housing. They can be found on pages 25 on the side-by-side, and then 36 to 37. Mr. Arneson will be discussing the last piece, which is a transition aid component. As I indicated, 4D is low-income rental housing that's certified by the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. There have been, throughout the last several years, a number of class rate changes that have made to this program. Sort of the program, as we now know, it was established as Class 4D within Minnesota Statutes 273-13 in 1998, and at that time was given a class rate of 1%. In 2005, the class rate was reduced from 1.25% down to 0.75%. Perhaps the most notable class rate change was included in the 2013 Omnibus tax bill to become effective for assessment 2014, and that's when the current two-tier class rate was adopted. And as it currently stands, there is a 0.75% class rate, and then any value exceeding the first tier would be taxed at a 0.25 class rate. It's unique in that I believe it's the only property tax classification where as the value of the property increases, the class rate decreases. In 2013, that first tier was set at $100,000, and in subsequent years, the first tier limit is adjusted by the average statewide change in estimated market value of property classified as Class 4D or 4A, which is the typical 4+ unit apartment rentals. The value must be rounded to the nearest 1,000, provided that that first tier limit may never be less than 100,000. In 2021, because the first tier valuation limits had increased, the legislature at that time sort of rolled back and froze that first tier limit. So it was rolled back to 100,000 and frozen for assessment year 22 and 23. And beginning in assessment 2024, that first tier limit will continue to be adjusted annually under current law. There are several provisions, as I indicated, within the Senate tax bill that modifies the Class 4D program, and I'll go through those briefly now. The first would be to require municipal approval. So under the Senate proposal, a property owner must receive approval by the governing body of a city or town where the property is located before applying to the Housing Finance Agency for initial Class 4D or 4D1, as we're renaming it, for property that was not in whole or in part classified as Class 4D prior to assessment 2024. Under the proposed language, once a property owner receives that approval, they are not required to seek subsequent approval in each subsequent year for that yearly certification from the Housing Finance Agency. Likewise, approval under this proposal is not required if the property is located in a city or town in which the net tax capacity of 4D1 property did not exceed 2% of the jurisdiction's total net tax capacity in the prior assessment year. Another section of the bill would simply sort of add that municipal approval to the formal application that is submitted to the Housing Finance Agency. Section of the bill also would reduce the class rate for all 4D1 units. So as I indicated, there's the current law two-tier limit of 0.75 or 0.25. The Senate proposal would eliminate that two-tier system and would set the class rate at 0.25 for all Class 4D1 units. Madam Chair and members, there's also within the Senate bill what's called a Class 4D1 Class 8 Reduction Property Tax Savings Report. And under this language, counties would be required to identify not more than 10 properties located within the county with the greatest number of Class 4D units. And the county would be required to survey each property owner as to how that owner used property tax savings resulting from the class rate reduction. The counties are required to report to the legislature and organized by uses, including how the property owners use savings for either property maintenance, security improvements or operations, rent stabilization, or increases in the property's capital fund balance. And Madam Chair, I would defer to Ms. Arneson to talk about the transition aid component of the Senate bill.
Madam Chair, as Mr. Sylvia indicated, the the proposal in total also includes a transition aid program that would be applicable for aid payable in 2025 and 2026 only. So it's a 2-year aid program. In order to be eligible to generate any aid, a city would need to have the tax capacity of 41 property equal at least 2% of the city's total tax capacity in assessment year 2023. The aid formula is essentially a function of the city's pay 2024 tax rate and essentially the portion of the class 41 tax capacity that exceeds 2% of the city's total tax capacity that would be reduced as a result of the class rate changes proposed earlier in the bill. The revenue estimate and our internal modeling indicate that approximately 36 cities would qualify for 2 years of transition aid, and that the aid amount in total for each of those 2 years would total approximately $580,000 per year. I'm glad to answer other questions as necessary.
Sure. Are there questions from the members? I don't believe you included 4D in your bill this time, but I know that there's a money thing here, so this is not anything we could adopt. But Chair Gomez and I have agreed that we will not be meeting tomorrow, but Representative Gomez, I don't think that means the work on this bill needs to stop. And I was wondering if there would be a member on your side that you could ask to discuss 4D with me, because it's my bill. And perhaps by Thursday, we might have a recommendation to make to a tentative one, because it's money, a tentative one to make to the conference committee. Would that be agreeable? And who would that person be?
Well, Madam Chair, having just received the question, I would need to go back to my team to determine who that would be, if we're going to move forward in that way.
Yeah. Whoever it is, happy to work that out afterwards to see where we could have an opportunity to meet and see if we could come to a recommendation. I think we have, and again, I'm sorry, not speaking loud enough. We are trying to be efficient, but also effective in moving forward. And although you're well aware, I have a penchant for no public meetings, so that doesn't mean that individual members can't meet and give their recommendations with any kind of stakeholders or whoever they want to meet with, and make a recommendation to the conference committee. I think that's perfectly reasonable way to proceed, and hope that will be agreeable to you, and in particular, since we're not able to meet tomorrow and we don't want the work to stop. So that's why I'm making it.
Madam Chair?
Sure.
When it's appropriate, I just would like to offer some comments on the House position on 4D generally, but
course, you
I
can
don't know
do
if
it right
that's
now.
right now. Right now? Okay, great. Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. So I just, I guess, want to start by saying that I know that this has been a priority for, certain affordable housing advocates for many years. And I think that the House and the Senate share a commitment to, ensuring that we have adequate housing for people who live in Minnesota that's affordable and that makes sense for their lives. I think that I appreciate some of the guardrails that are included in the Senate's position on 4D, including municipal approval, although, that doesn't extend to county school boards or other taxing jurisdictions who would also be impacted by the shift in 4D. I also appreciate the report about how the savings is used, because that's one of my concerns about implementing this change in the 4D policy, is that there is no requirement that the financial benefits of 4D are passed on to renters, or that those dollars are reinvested in the building even. And so, we have both nonprofit and for-profit actors who are, who build and operate affordable housing in our communities. And, so for some of those entities, it's very much, if you're a nonprofit housing, provider, housing developer, like, we know that these, kind of the benefit of this shift and this tax break that accrues to those entities, we know when it's a nonprofit that it's not going in anybody's pocket, that it's going back into the building, that it's, helping to ensure that, that buildings are maintained well, and, that if there is extra savings to be had, that's passed on to the tenants in those buildings. But, without a requirement that those benefits accrue to the folks living in the buildings, there is, with the reality of, operators and developers who do affordable housing in our communities, there is the possibility of those ending up as profits. So, I do appreciate the report. I think that, if we're going to move forward with this, I would like to talk a little bit more about if there's a way to make it not just a report, but, something that would be required, that reinvestment. I also appreciate the transition aid that accompanies this. I would say that it's, it's limited in duration and, limited only to those cities, I believe, that have a 2% or greater shift. So, there are a number of cities where their kind of tax mix would be impacted, who don't receive that aid. And again, it has that limited jurisdiction, or I mean, that limited duration, excuse me. So I know that in the 2021 tax bill, there is this issue because there's an inflator on the bracket, on the kind of separation between the two tiers, and that in 2021, we rebased the tiers basically, and they'd inflate it up to like 170 something, I think, 175 or so. And it was rebased back to $100,000 for that lower tier. And so because that's effective, sort of because of the timing of it, it's like we haven't actually completely seen the impact of that change. So that's one piece. I think that what Representative Listlegard, Chair Listlegard, I talked yesterday when I talked about the kind of trend in homestead valuation and the increase in the value in that area, along with the increase in the cost of delivering public services, that counties and cities have experienced, as we all have, right? Like, as inflation has impacted our individual family budgets, it's also impacted public budgets in a lot of different ways. And so, I will say that Chair Listlegard, kind of one of the principles that flowed through his work in the property tax division, which you'll see reflected in the House's, or in the House's position on property taxes, was that we're looking really skeptically at shifts, especially this year, because of this trend in valuation, and because there has been pretty significant growth in this sector overall. Over the last 10 years and especially over the last 3 or 4 years. And, again, like, we're all really thrilled to see that there is more and more affordable housing options. And we know that we need to use the tools that we have at our disposal to ensure that, like, we're continuing to build housing, that we're continuing to support our partners who are building and operating that affordable housing. But, I guess again, we're sort of, from our perspective, looking skeptically at shifts this year. And we want a lot of information about what impact that would have on our local partners. And I've heard from our local partners some hesitation about implementing this, again, just in the face of those sort of factors that we heard about. And, you know, when we were looking at some of these proposals, you know, the transition aid acknowledges that there are certain communities where the impacts of this would be concentrated, and I do appreciate that, but, you know, the value kind of across the state of the property that would be impacted by the change in 4D that's proposed here is $9.2 billion. And so it's a significant, that's just the value of the property, not the value of not the tax that would be shifted, of course. But, so that's kind of like, I think, some of the ways that we were thinking about 4D this year. And so I appreciate the chance to just share that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Gomez, and I tend to be responsive to the concerns you've raised and to work with Representative Leslie Gard, reviewing our proposal, and if there are, with stakeholders, and if they're, to look at possibilities that could bring about a good compromise and make the bill better. When we presented it this year, the testimony that came before the Senate Tax Committee was more than one person said that 4D is the best policy developed on low-income housing, and we're really in years, and I can't remember exactly when we passed it the first time, but I was particularly, and I hope that you'll be looking at that provision, Representative Lissegard, the one that is Senator Dibble's bill, where we allowed, what is those properties called? The 4D,
Madam Chair, is it a community land trust property?
yeah, that we allowed those properties to qualify for the homestead credit. And that is a move toward really recognizing incentives for more homeowners. And renters are great, and so are homeowners, and we welcomed Senator Dibble's bill, even though he had carried it separately, not as part of the 4D bill. But I think we can get there and hope we can have a conversation and present something that might work for us on Thursday, given that we wouldn't propose anything other than in principle, because it's a money item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to mention, I appreciate you bringing up the Community Land Trust 4D classification. That is just the one little piece that we carried in our bill, so just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to comment? Okay, that's our 4D proposal. Then, where's my agenda? Been moving too many things around here. Oh, yeah. One of my other favorite topics, tax increment financing. And we would like to go through the TIF provisions. They are sometimes different, they're sometimes identical, and Mr. Sylvia is going to help us through that, and I'm going to comment on the provisions that we want to be recommending to the conference committee report. These do not, the conference committee, these do not have an immediate or obvious fiscal impact. So, Mr. Sylvia, do you want to guide us through that and be pointing out to folks where these provisions occur in the side-by-side?
Madam Chair and members, the TIF proposals begin on page 56 of the side-by-side. A few days ago, Mr. Cope and I walked through the respective tax increment financing articles. And as members may recall, there were a number of proposals that were either identical or just had a few sort of technical and inconsequential changes. But either of those proposals could have been adopted without changing the intent or
Could
the
you say
effect.
again the page number for the side-by-side?
Madam Chair, it's page 56.
56. Thank you.
But having said that, there are just 5 individual city proposals that we were going to know for the conference committee as being either different substantially or were not carried in the House tax bill. And the first city that I would highlight that is on page 56 of the side-by-side is a TIF proposal for the city of Hopkins. What the Senate proposal is to increase total permitted pooling from 25 to 28% and to increase from 20 to 25% the permitted pooling for housing or redevelopment activities. This is a redevelopment district that was established in 1999 and began to collect increment for the first time in the year 2000. Over the last few years, there have been some legislative changes that were made to the specific TIF district number 2-11. In 2003, the legislature authorized a 4-year duration extension to 2029. It prohibited pooling completely except for administrative expenses and extended the 5-year rule to 9 years. In 2008, the legislature authorized pooling for housing activities, provided that expenditures do not exceed 20% of the total tax increment collected from the district. And most recently, Madam Chair and members, in 2019, the legislature expanded the eligible pooling to allow blight correction in addition to the previously enacted housing project pooling allowance. However, it limited administrative expenses to 10% and the total amount of pooling to 25%. And Madam Chair and members, the Senate proposal would just, again, increase the total permitted pooling for the entire district and also increase the permitted pooling for housing and redevelopment activities.
Thank you, Mr. Sylvia. We note that the House does not have this provision. We have looked at it, all of them, almost, that have come, that were also in the 2022 bill. I think the most important features are that the total permitted pooling is proposed from 25 to 28%, and then an increase from 20 to 25%, the permitted pooling for housing or redevelopment activities. And we, if we had adopted the 22 Conference Committee report, that's what we looked back to. And there are limits on, obviously, on pooling, and whether it may be applied to activities outside the district or whether it's restricted inside the district. But in the last few years, I in particular have been trying to provide appropriate flexibility to local governments in making use of the singular tool and of economic development in cities across the state of Minnesota, we really want them to be able to reach the general law pooling reach out for that for redevelopment activities. We do not think it's necessary, so it's not in our provision to extend the duration. This district's been around for quite a while. And so the district must still, in our provision, still decertify in 2029. Any questions about that? Mr. Sylvia, do you want to continue with your list?
Madam Chair, members, the next city that I will isolate is the city of Bloomington. That's also found beginning on page 56 of the side-by-side. This relates to a redevelopment district that was originally certified in 2005. It's commonly referred to as the Bloomington Central Station. Both the House and the Senate have provisions that modify this TIF district. And in fact, both the House and the Senate provide a 5-year extension of the 5- and 6-year rule. Where the House and the Senate differ is that the House provides a parcel by parcel duration extension so that if there is no building on the parcel as of the effective date of this proposal, then the duration of that parcel would be able to be extended beyond its current decertification date, which is right now 2049. The Senate, as I indicated, provides a 5- and 6-year rule extension, but instead of that parcel by parcel extension, which I'm not aware has been done quite like that before, the Senate just provides a complete 5-year duration extension. Other than that, Madam Chair, both provisions do have the same required effective date, which would be approval by the city, county, and school district whenever duration extension is proposed.
Thank you, Mr. Sylvia. We looked at, and I did certainly visit this district physically, and took a look at where those individual parcels were going to pop up, and worked with the city and its representatives, and really came to the conclusion that doing it parcel by parcel was time-consuming and just not very efficient, and that it's better just to do and more effective to do a general 5-year extension for this district. So I hope that the House will see that a parcel by parcel extension is really unprecedented. We've never been asked that before, and it can become. Bloomington is a very sophisticated city with the use of, I think obvious to all of us, the use of tax increment financing, but if we do it parcel by parcel, it could result in an administrative nightmare. And if we did a parcel extension, when the district, which is due to expire in 2039, if there's no building on it in 2023, just doesn't make sense, and may not be quite the incentives that we would want to promote in terms of behavior relating to those parcels. So I believe that City of Bloomington accepts and supports our approach, and I hope that when the time comes to consider a motion for these TIF proposals, that you would accept and endorse the Senate proposal. Next, we have Duluth.
Madam Chair and members, both the House and the Senate have two separate proposals concerning the city of Duluth. Those can be found on pages 57 and 58 of the side-by-side. In just a bit of history, in 2009, the city of Duluth requested and the legislature granted certain special law that would allow the city to establish a tax increment financing districts within a designated area. To my knowledge, that no districts have yet been created pursuant to that special law, but the proposal that was brought forward by the city of Duluth was not to modify that 2019 special legislation, but instead to sort of create a second duplicative authorization, and working with the city on the Senate side, rather than move forward with that original proposal, the Senate modified the 2019 special legislation, and in doing so, the Senate would allow no more than 2 redevelopment districts to be established within that defined area and extend the duration of districts by 5 years. The House included the original proposal and would also authorize a 10-year duration extension rather than a 5-year duration extension. The second proposal, again found on page 58, is new authorization from the city of Duluth. And this would again authorize the city to establish multiple redevelopment districts within a defined area. The Senate only included sort of partial exemptions from general law. The Senate would allow the districts to be established with an exemption from the sort of so-called blight test, and also the statutory requirement that 90% of increment generated from the district be used on blight corrections that would allow the district to be created in the first instance. The House, in their proposal, included that same authorization to establish districts and an exemption from the blight test. However, there are a number of other general law exemptions that are authorized. Those would be to include a complete exemption from any pooling limitations, a complete exemption from the 5- and 6-year rule, allowing increment to be spent on public parks or social recreational facilities, and lastly, to exempt the district from the general law prohibition on an authority acquiring more than 25% of the acreage in a TIF project using TIF bond proceeds. So again, Madam Chair, there are 2 separate provisions dealing with Duluth, and both proposals sort of treat them a little separately.
Thank you, Mr. Sylvia. We did limit that, the number of new districts that could be authorized, and thought that that was a reasonable response to their request. City of Duluth did what any number of cities do when they have a new TIF proposal. They come in and they say, we'll just take the usual exemptions. And that's from the blight test, there's from this test, it's from everything. And we have kind of, our response informally has usually been, get real. We're not going to be doing that. And you can, for the most part, live within the general provisions of the TIF law. And we do have an exemption from the blight test often enough, because we find ourselves in very different circumstances from when tax increment financing was initially authorized in the cities and in Minnesota and across the country, for that matter. When we were looking for ways of attracting manufacturers and developers and whatever inside the cities where they really didn't want to come anymore. It was not worth it to them. There was no incentive to do that. And tax increment financing became the one tool that we could look at to deal with blighted properties, and in particular in some of our large cities. On occasion, nowadays we note that the blight test, although we've not changed it, is nevertheless has to be set aside. For example, in one project in Minneapolis, the buildings themselves did not meet the blight test because they didn't have restrooms in them. Otherwise, they were pretty much, by anybody's optics looking at them, they were blighted property. So sometimes we've had to do that, but we don't we just deem it blighted by giving an exception to that rule. And we have tried very hard to otherwise keep the projects in the cities accountable to general law changes, and have not had complete pooling exemptions. It's very hard to make a really, really compelling case for that, or complete exemptions from the 5- and 6-year rules where you expect at least something to happen on a particular property. And where we allow the increment to be spent, and I'm repeating what Mr. Sylvia said because it's very important. You just can't come in and say we're going to have a tax increment financing district and we don't want any rules. That is in the Senate, and I'm hoping in the House that is just not acceptable. We very much support the efforts that Duluth is making in those parts of the city to use this tool effectively, and we think they agree at this point that the cautions that we brought up in our discussions with them, and I was joined in those, by the way. This is a favorite area of property tax law for me, but Senator Klein and Senator Weber are also very familiar with it and met with cities to review all of these provisions, and with our Senate Council to come up with the recommendations that to the rest of us that deal with these cities. But this one, this second new thing, new district, just went a mile too far here. But we do want them to be very successful. Duluth is, other than where I live in New Hope, Duluth is my favorite Minnesota city, and I'm happy to do whatever I can to make sure that they are successful. As Lake Superior is being cleaned up, in Duluth, it has always been a tourism magnet, but that the benefits both to their citizens and to tourists that come can be just extraordinary. So TIF is a very appropriate tool for their economic development and redevelopment activities, but there needs to be some cautions. Next, we have Ramsey.
Madam Chair and members, the next city-specific provision I will discuss is this, the city of Ramsey, and this can be found on page 58 of the side-by-side. This is a Senate-only provision. And the Senate would simply allow an additional 3-year extension of both a 5- and 6-year rule for a redevelopment district in the city of Ramsey. This is a redevelopment district that was certified in 2011 and is set to decertify at the end of 2040. And I'll note that the legislature in 2021 extended the 5- and 6-year rule by an additional 2 years. And the request again this year is to do an additional 3 years for both the 5- and 6-year rule.
And we are supporting that request. And then Plymouth?
Madam Chair and members, the last city-specific proposal I will isolate would be the city of Plymouth, and that can be found on page 60 of the side-by-side. Both the House and the Senate contain a proposal modifying the city's request to establish redevelopment districts. The Senate limits the number of districts that may be established pursuant to this special law to not more than 2, so only 2 districts within the project area could be established. It does not authorize a 5- and 6-year rule extension, but it does allow that up to 75% of the revenue generated from the district may be spent on improving a trail within the city. The Senate also exempts the district from the blight test and that corresponding requirement that 90% of the increment be used to correct blight conditions. The difference between the House and the Senate proposal is that the House would allow multiple districts, whereas I indicated the Senate limits the districts that may be established to not more than 2. And the House would also extend the 5- and 6-year rule, and the Senate does not include those 5- and 6-year rule extensions.
It's kind of unusual to provide for an extension of the 5- and 6-year rule with a district that's just getting going. If it's not going to, if it's not working out, that's when we want people to come back and ask for an extension, not to admit defeat before you're even establishing a district. Mr. Sylvia, could you go back with the, and just indicate, here are 5 cities that are different, either they're not in the House bill, or we have significant differences. Would you just go back and name the ones where we're basically alike and there's just some inconsequential changes that the House or the Senate could kind of go either way with the advice of the professional counsel?
Sure. Madam Chair, members, looking at the side-by-side, beginning on page 57, both the House and the Senate have identical provisions relating to a TIF district for the city of St. Paul. The House and Senate have identical provisions relating to the city of Savage. That's noted in Senate Article 7, Section 6, House Article 8, Section 17.
And that project, Mr. Sylvia, is what?
The city of Savage.
I know,
Oh.
the project.
This is similar authorization that is proposed this year for the city of Shakopee. This is relating to a gravel pit authorization initially enacted in 2014, and what the city is requesting now is an additional extension of the 5-year rule and also the period by which the geographic area of the district may be enlarged. Under current law, that cannot be enlarged more than 5 years after certification.
Do you
of the
recall
district.
the argument they made for why it needed to be enlarged? I don't remember, so that's why I'm asking.
Madam Chair, I don't remember specifically
Okay.
the reason. I know
If
it's,
any member is interested, we'll get that argument and justification from them. It's a little bit unusual request as well.
Madam Chair, members, the next city that is nearly identical would be authorization for the city of Chatfield. This would allow the city of Chatfield or its Economic Development District to establish an economic development, to establish an economic development district to construct a multi-level hotel within a specified area, provided that the first floor of the hotel does not exceed 15,000 square feet. This relates to current law limitations for economic development districts to be able to use increment for commercial development. There is sort of the small city exception. But within that small city exception, there's also the limitation that the entire project not exceed 15,000 square feet. This authorization, which I indicated is substantially similar in both proposals, would allow the city of Chatfield to do that. Specific to construction of a hotel, that 15,000 square foot limitation would only apply to the first floor of the hotel.
And members, we've dealt with provisions like this before. They're not common. They're not exactly rare. We could put and did think about a general law change, but because the proposal itself didn't seem unreasonable. It's Senator Nelson's back here, and but that better to make it a specific proposal this time around for Chatfield, and if there were other cities that came forward with similar proposals, that we perhaps could make a general law change that would not occasion special law proposals. But so far, we only have Chatfield, so that's why it's in here as a named city rather than as a general law change that really not extreme amount of opposition to. But for this time, this go-round, that we want to take a look at whether we get more proposals like that before we make the general law change.
Madam Chair, members, moving to page 59 of the side-by-side, the House and Senate have essentially identical proposal for the city of Fridley. This would allow the city to transfer increment from a particular designated TIF district to the city's Housing and Redevelopment Authority. This authorization mirrors legislation enacted in 2021 for the cities of Minnetonka and Ridgefield. The only difference between the two authorizations from the House and Senate is that a legislative report, which is due, is just extended out 1 year for the Senate, and also the authority to actually transfer increment under this authorization is also extended out 1 year under the Senate proposal. Other than that, the language and the authorization is identical.
Thank you, Mr. Sylvia. Fridley's been a challenge to deal with their request successfully, but they've been very persistent and giving us a lot of information to let this project and it's the city's request, which is a bit unusual, to go forward. Been working with them for a couple of years. Have visited that project with Senator Kunesh, and think it was in last year's bill too, but I think it's one we should go forward with, even though a bit unusual. And again, it's in this House bill too, but that is, I think it's just important for us to keep understanding where is there a reasonable justification for a deviation from TIF law, and to be very careful about granting those exceptions and paying attention to the I don't know if they call them oddities, but the ingenious way or the innovations to TIF law that they are proposing.
Madam Chair, members, I would move on to page 61 of the side-by-side. Both the House and the Senate, again, has nearly identical proposals for the city of Shakopee. This would allow the city to create multiple redevelopment districts within a gravel pit area within the city. This authorization is nearly identical to that provided to the city of Apple Valley, Maple Grove, and Savage in 2013 and 2014. The only differences between the House and Senate language is really technical formatting differences, but the authorization and the intent of the proposals are identical.
And members, we would welcome the advice of the professional staff, Health Research, and SCRAFA to determine which language is more effective and is better when we come to act on that. Spicer, you want to talk about Spicer?
Madam Chair, I would move on to page 62
Okay.
of the proposal. The last two cities I would isolate are the city of West St. Paul and the city of Woodbury. Again, the Senate and the House have identical or nearly identical proposals. For the city of West St. Paul, this would allow the city to designate or establish a district. Both the House and the Senate provide an exemption from the blight test. There is some difference in how the House and Senate treat that sort of secondary component requiring 90% of increment be used to correct blight conditions. I think I'd work with Mr. Cope to maybe recommend one version or the other, but essentially the authorization is identical. And just moving on to the city of Woodbury, these provisions are identical, but for, again, some minor technical differences. This would make two changes to a district within the city of Woodbury. It would first extend the duration of the district and also would allow increment from a district to be used on the city's Central Park Recreation Center.
Okay. Thank you. Are there questions or comments? Senator Weber?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Maybe I missed it. Were we going to talk about the three small cities and the overall change we
I
had
was gonna bring
proposed?
that up
Okay,
now.
very good. Thank you.
Thank you. We've had a request and talked to cities about how far away something has to be. Earlier on in TIF law, we wanted to make sure that we didn't really have competing projects that would cancel one another out. And so we established a distance factor between cities of a certain size, that you couldn't have a TIF project within, and now I mean, that's the principle, I don't remember the exact feet or miles, and that has become, I think it was 10 miles, and that's become very problematic for a few small cities, and we can get special legislation that provides for them, with notwithstanding clauses, which some of us love and some of us hate. But we could make it a general law change so that people in those cities that were 5 miles away rather than 10 miles away, whether they could proceed under the general TIF law with their project. We still are listing the individual cities and welcome that description, but would hope that the House would also look at and see if we're ready to move to a definition that is general law change. And I know, Senator Weber, you've dealt with this probably most of the three of us. Do you want to describe that a little bit more in the specific?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think one of the rationales for probably expanding that is sometimes what we see is that these communities, and particularly the three small cities listed here this year, have the situation whereby they tend to serve a larger community in terms of housing, et cetera. Nicollet and Lafayette are close to the city of New Ulm and Mankato, Nicollet being between the two. Spicer is on a major lake close to a regional center in terms of Wilmer. And they do provide, they fall within, they serve a larger area than sometimes a small community by itself may. And so I think that that is one of the reasons for justification for changing that definition. And that would be, I think, what I have to add to it at this point.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Representative Gomez?
I just had a quick comment. I guess I just wanted to extend my thanks to the Senate for what is obviously a lot of thought and experience that's gone into analyzing these TIF proposals that are in front of us, and just really appreciate how we've highlighted in this conversation, that every one of these is a proposal for a deviation from what already exists, and that TIF is designed the way that it is intentionally. And so, I just appreciate the careful attention to every one of these kind of requests for an exception to, the law that already exists. So just look forward to digging in more to the differences, and I know we can come to a good agreement on this for our members and the people of our state. So.
Thank you, Representative Gomez. Might be one as well, and I think it's probably going to be Lisliard again, but that if there's someone that you could designate to us to work with any one of the three of us to resolve those issues. I think some of them can be done very quickly. I think we got information after you did in terms of what was already in your bill or you'd heard from particularly like a city like Bloomington, we were really struggling with them about that parcel by parcel, and work with them, and I think they're, as far as I understand, they're quite satisfied with the approach that was taken in the Senate, and we can, we can find out over the next 2 days and maybe have a recommendation on this article as well. So we will, we won't be meeting tomorrow. As you know, the Senate withdrew its support for worldwide reporting for a major part of the revenue in the bill, and we have been consulting with the House and the Department of Revenue, and we're working on alternative revenue sources. And there's more than one we're going to have, but one of them is going to involve using GILTI, and also looking at increasing the phase-out of itemized deductions for taxpayers who have more than a couple 100,000, 300,000, whatever it is, wherever the sweet spot is in itemized deductions. And those two provisions would still need some scrutiny, but they're real money, and they're, I don't think the GILTI really is scalable, but certainly in any meaningful way, certainly the other one is. GILTI can apply to both mostly corporations, but also certainly some information. It is the intangible income that foreign operating corporations have. It would be it's a conformity item from 2019. It is part of the federal tax law now, and the legislature did not move forward on making it conforming to that, and left that source of income, possible potential income, alone. And there are other, there are any number, not any number, there are some other alternatives that I'm hoping that the conference committee will look at. Number one, for the replacement, a source of replacement income for considering not having the worldwide reporting, and then the possibility, real possibility that we're going to need additional revenue beyond that, even to make good on the goals of the House and of the governor and of the Senate. They're not all mutually exclusive, but we have some that they don't, and vice versa, and I am absolutely confident we can get there. So we're not handing out spreadsheets. We have them for ourselves to look at, but that's not what we're trying to do. It's not a proposal. It is just an alternative of where additional revenue might be found, rather than the worldwide reporting. Representative Gomez, that's my agenda for today. If there are other things that you would like to discuss, we're open.
No, thank you, Madam Chair.
You're good? Okay, so tomorrow, it would ordinarily be Representative Gomez's turn to chair, but we're not going to be meeting tomorrow, and I have offered to let her be the chair on Thursday. So we will be hearing from the House, setting up a time on Thursday, and I don't have the sheet in front of me that says what the Senate's agenda is for that day. Sometimes that gets in the way of being able to meet, but I would assume it will probably be sometime in the afternoon. Representative Gomez, do you have any comment then?
Oh, no, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure. We'll be call of the chair on Thursday and communicate as soon as we know the schedules of the House and Senate, what the best time is. Thank you very much.
And we will hope, we'll encourage members on those given areas to, 4D and TIF or whatever, to, who have an interest in that on the House and the Senate side, to talk with one another and see if there are places where we can start to come up with a tax increment article, and including, as we did today, the wonderful, wonderful, wonderful work done by the State Auditor's Office that has been embraced by so many in making changes to the general TIF law. It's the first time that's really been done that successfully in years, and we're very grateful to them. So, with that, Madam Chair, the committee stands adjourned until Thursday at the call of the chair.